Hello everybody, I am Angry Bird, back with a new Steel Division 2 Pro Deck review. This time we're looking at the 15th Infantry put together by Nilla. If you want to learn a bit more about this deck and how to use it, make sure you stay tuned. This series aims to bring you top tier 1v1 decks for you to use. So first things first, we start off with the same old question: what is your general game plan when you pick or play this deck? Now Nilla, I think he wanted to stress that he made this deck quite quickly, 5 minutes before he played Sean in the Steel Division 2 league, and it was 100% counter pick at that point. But he says that it's aimed to play somewhat like the 3rd Canadian deck. You know, use those infantry rifles liberally, rely on RT to abuse enemy AA in defensive positions, and then push forward with those infantry supported by Churchills in a kind of World War I style advance. Very much an infantry attacking deck. Okay, so moving into the Recon tab, a couple of things I want to say here. First of all, you get a lot of options with the 15th Scots in the Recon tab. Often you see people take the Humber Mark 4s, the AEC Mark 3, even the Daimlers. You see people taking the snipers, Humber Mark 3s, Scouts Piat. There's quite a lot of choices here. Nilla, he's opted for 1 card of snipers and 1 card of scouts in the 2-inch carrier. In terms of the scouts with the Piat, there's kind of 2 things to bring up about this. First of all, it is a Piat squad, so it's kind of like an anti-tank squad, but with it being in the Recon tab, with the Recon, you know, optics, it doesn't push that front line forward, so you can maneuver this behind enemy lines and get some nice Piat shots onto tanks where the enemy won't be expecting it. So that's the first way to use these scouts. The second way is with the 2-inch carrier, or the second weapon is the 2-inch carrier. So this 2-inch carrier is surprisingly effective, but it takes quite a lot of micro and it doesn't always work out. But that 2-inch mortar fires at 28 rounds a minute. It does a hell of a lot of suppression if it can get on target. The problem is, you know, the 2-inch carrier itself, it only has 10mm of armor. It can die to those anti-tank rifles. Although since the Fate of Finland patch, the AT rifles aren't quite as good as they were, so its survivability has increased a little bit. And against the Germans, they don't really have those AT rifles. So if you can get this 2-inch carrier into action against infantry without anti-tank weapons, it can actually be quite a good unit. Look out for it. See if you can use it, give it a go. But it does take a little bit of micro to get used to. So into the infantry tab, and it's rifles, 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 and more rifles, with an engineer leader thrown in for good measure. I asked Nilla about it. Why doesn't he take anything different but rifles? The answer being that 3-star rifles are actually pretty decent against Russian infantry, and with rifles you get numbers. I mean, look at the B and C phase cards, 24 on those B phase cards, 36 on those C phase cards. You get a hell of a lot of rifles. The aim in this deck is to overwhelm the enemy infantry with just rifle fire, and it works really well. In A phase, notice the difference, he's taken the 1-star vetted rifles. So the idea here is to up vet them to 3 stars with the engineer leader and the commander in the support tab, and 3-star rifles are pretty deadly. The other thing is, at 20 points a piece on Flatline income, you're bringing in 6 squads of rifles per tick. You know, 6 squads of 3-star vet rifles in that first reinforcing tick is pretty powerful. I did ask why perhaps he doesn't bring in the motorized rifle with the Piats to give him that extra AT killing ability. He felt that he didn't need it. He has the Churchills, he has the 6-pounder, and those Piats in the Recon tab as well. Onto the tank tab. So Nilla opts to take 5 Churchill 4s in A phase in this deck, along with 3 Churchill 4 commanders. Now, the reason he takes this tank is for the gun, the 6-pounder. It's a fantastic gun, and we'll see it in the anti-tank tab as well. The frontal armor, 90mm, is pretty decent. The speed is bad on the Churchills. You know, they take a long time to get to the front. But the gun is where it's at. Just the standard AP at 115mm of penetration can penetrate pretty much all the German mediums. 12 rounds a minute as well on a tank gun is really good. APCR, you can penetrate the heavies, almost up to a King Tiger. I mean, obviously you can't pen a King Tiger at long range, but you get a side shot on a King Tiger, you can still pen it with a Churchill 4. So at 60 points, it is a good tank. The downsides, the lack of HE, you know, it is slow. You have to use it in specific ways. It has a specific job, and that's taking out tanks. I think one thing Nilla could do with this is upvet these Churchills. I didn't think he would use 8 of them in total in Phase A. I asked him that and he did agree. He mentioned obviously he built this as a counter deck very quickly before a match. I think you could have upvet this to 1 or even 2 stars in A phase. Even at 2 stars you get basically 6 tanks here. And then look at the rate of fire, up to 16 rounds a minute at 2 star. That thing fires like a beast. Quickly mentioning the Churchill 4 Commander, usually we don't see the leader tanks taken. This can escort your infantry because it moves so slowly, it's not really going to get ahead of the line. Moving on to the Churchill 7, Nilla takes that in B phase, 4 tanks. The reason he takes that, the frontal armour, 150mm of frontal armour is a lot. It's a lot of frontal armour on a tank that costs 85. It doesn't have a great gun, but it's there for the frontal armour to bounce shots. I asked Nilla about it. He says he takes it due to the armour. As the game goes on, the chance of running into more and more AT guns increases, and the quality of the AT guns also increase. You know, in B phase, C phase, you're bound to be encountering Pack 40s. In A phase, it's more likely to be Pack 36, Pack 38, you know, M42 guns. So increasing that armour to 150mm means you can bounce shots. That means that it can push forwards, take the shots, and your other units can then take out those AT guns. He also points out as well, the reason he doesn't take it in A is the availability is really bad. 2 tanks at 85 points, you know, for a card, that's really bad. So B phase, at least you get those extra 2 tanks, makes it a bit more palatable to take the unit. Onto the support tab, and it's interesting to see so many Churchill 5s here. This is basically the support gun for the British. There's no IG-18s, there's no OB-25s, you know, there's no versions of those static infantry support guns. The British, they have the Churchill 5. It fulfills the same role. It's basically a support gun on tracks. I asked Nilla about it. He says that obviously, you know, long range HE, the rifles limit out. So you need some kind of support gun there to support the infantry with HE damage at long range. And you don't really get that from your tanks. You know, those A-phase tanks, they only have the AP ammunition, no HE shots. So these Churchill 5s, they're here to do that HE damage. And they're pretty effective at that. The other thing is, use these in combination with those B-phase Churchills with the 150mm frontal armour and also the Crocodiles. You know, push these forwards. They soak up the AT shots, 150mm of frontal armour. It's tough to penetrate them. Have the Churchill 5s just behind with those HE shells and they will fire on the AT guns and destroy them pretty quickly. You know, if you can use them in tandem, it does work. The other big thing here in the support tab is the AVRE. I mean, I love this unit. It's a fantastic unit. It's quite unique. Massive 290mm spigot mortar, 14 HE damage. This thing's like the Sturm Tiger before the Sturm Tiger. The downside is, you know, the range. I asked Nilla about this because it seems like this would fit into a World War I style attacking division. Nilla said it was a cool unit, but the 2 major issues, the range, only 500 meters, is really short. It's really hard to use this unit. Secondly, micro. Because of that range, it takes a lot of micro and it's expensive. 110 points, you know, it's costly. So he doesn't see it as viable for him I probably would still take it, but I think that's more on the fact that I just love the unit and blowing stuff up at close range. Who doesn't love that? Okay, on to the anti-tank tab, and the British really shine here with their AT guns. There is the 6-pounder, we mentioned it before, it's an absolutely fantastic gun. I'm not really going to talk about it again. Then we have the 17-pounder. I mean, 170mm of penetration on a standard AP shell is really good at 8 rounds a minute. This thing is fantastic at taking out heavies. We also have the Achilles, which is basically a 17-pounder on tracks. I asked Nilla what's his purpose for the Achilles, and it's basically there to support the Churchills in a tank/infantry push, you know, by putting a 17-pounder in the open basically. The Achilles is here to support a tank push across open ground, and it's got the gun to take out the heavies. You just got to be a little bit careful with it because it does have weak armor, 75mm of frontal armor, open top. These things can die fairly easily, so you've got to use them intelligently. Onto the anti-air tab, and it's basically Bofors. Cardiff Bofors in A, Cardiff Bofors in B, and then also the Crusader AA, which is a Bofors on tracks, so it's still Bofors. I think he probably could drop that Cardiff Crusader AA Mark 1. He's got 3 Bofors in A, he's got 6 Bofors in B. I think that's just enough. He could maybe need a bit more, but I think if you're using more than 9 anti-aircraft guns in 1v1, it's very costly. I mean, you're talking nearly 900 points. So I think he could remove that one card, or you could remove that one card and use it elsewhere. It's also 3 points. That's quite a big saving. You could use those 3 points to use elsewhere. Onto the artillery tab, and I'm going to highlight the AOP carrier 203mm. We talked about the general game plan, and Nilla says that he pushes forwards in almost like a World War I style, lots of artillery, and then a push through with infantry and slow moving tanks. But the artillery is not necessarily the 25-pounders or the 5.5-inch guns. It's actually the AOP carrier here. Drop a huge off-map down and then push forwards. And that is kind of World War I. Onto the air tab now. Spitfires, 110 points. You could argue, you know, the Tempest is better, but at the moment, fighters, they're still not working as people expect them to. 150 points for a Tempest is expensive when it might not necessarily do the job that you want it to do. So I think the cheaper 110 point Spitfire is the way to go at the moment. That might change if fighters are fixed. And then you've got the Typhoon. They are just fantastic at deleting enemy heavy tanks. Any kind of tanks, they'll just delete them. They are kind of expensive at 160 points, but they do the job. I think the other aircraft here are kind of expensive for what you get. The Typhoon Mark 1B, 140 points for 2 110kg bombs. The Typhoon Mark 1B with 2 230kg bombs. And the rocket planes, you know, very expensive. When you compare those to the IL-2s with the same kind of loadouts, they're like 95 points, 105 points, and they're like really resilient aircraft. Okay, we've looked at specifics. Let's look at the deck as a whole. We asked Nilla, what kind of maps does it play best on? What doesn't it play too great on? In the city, at close range, you know, those rifles, 3 stars, all grouped up, cheap infantry, they can do a great job. There's really good artillery options as well. In the open, you'd be surprised, those crocodiles, the Churchill 7s, they can soak up a lot of damage and allow your HE tanks, the Churchill 5s, to get rid of the enemy AT guns and support guns. You've also got those great AT guns, the 6-pounders and the 17-pounders. They can take out tanks easily. Nilla says the Division, it doesn't work too well on river and forest maps. First of all, river, the Churchills are slow. You cannot get across those bridges easily, quickly, anytime soon. Forest maps, it's just a pain to deal with due to the lack of speed. And there's no dedicated forest fighting infantry. These are just rifles. So Nilla says avoid those 2 maps if you can. Next up, what specific divisions does this work well against? Doesn't work well against. So Nilla built this map to take on the 26th Rifles. It's an infantry / air based division. It does have good artillery options. He says the Scots will struggle against a medium tank division, and any division, you know, an allied division with Shermans, you're in for a tough fight. I asked about income. Nilla's built this with Flatline income. It has got 155 units of infantry. It is built to last into the late game. And finally, some quick fire questions just for interest really. I asked Nilla what he thinks the best unit is. He actually said the 1-star vet rifles. I'm thinking that's because when you get them to 3 stars, they can be pretty deadly. I asked what's the most overlooked unit. He says the Scouts Piat with that 2-inch carrier. I mean, if you get that thing working, it can deal a lot of damage, and obviously those Piats at 25 points just for the Piat squad alone, if you take out a tank with that, you're paying yourself off. If you take out like a Panther or a Tiger, wow, talk about value. I asked if there's a unit he feels he has to perform well with. He mentions the Churchill 5s. Remember, they're the HE support gun Churchills, so they are quite important. Concentrate on trying to improve using them, or try and use them well in combination with the Crocodiles and the Churchill 7s. And I asked if he was going to be playing against this deck, how he would counter it. He mentions Kuruk as a division that could counter this. Nilla says cheap infantry spam against cheap infantry spam is always a complete mess. Yeah, I can see his point. I asked Nilla how hard he feels it is to play this deck. You know, does it suit beginners, intermediate, advanced players? Nilla said he would only play this deck if he was an advanced player. It requires good income knowledge and good map knowledge. The deck will not bail you out if you mess up and make mistakes. I sort of agree with him, but I think if you're an intermediate player, you could start to play around with this deck. I think it has a specific play style, and if you can get that and you can use it well, then yeah, you can use the deck. I mean, spamming rifles is kind of easy, but at the same time it's kind of how you use the combinations of units together, using those Crocodiles and the Churchill 7s to push forwards ahead of your Churchill 6s, having your AT guns in the right place. You know, there's the map knowledge that Nilla's talking about, using your artillery at the right time, then pushing up your rifles. It does take that more advanced, more intermediate advanced player to start doing that. I think you could start tinkering with this as a kind of intermediate player, but you might struggle. Okay, let's talk about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Strengths: rifle spam. Rifles spam, not to be underestimated. You get a lot of infantry, you can last a long time, it's cheap, you can get them in quickly because it's cheap, and 3-star rifles are good. In that early game, get those 3-star rifles out, you can do a lot of damage. The AT guns in this deck, very strong. I don't really need to say more than that. The Typhoons, they're also great. Weaknesses, I think it's the slow moving tanks that's one of the big weaknesses. I mean, you need those Churchill 5s as your support guns. It can be a weakness, you can't hide them in heavy forests, but also all of your tanks just take ages to get to the front line, so you have to think ahead and order things in like 3 minutes before you need them there, because that is how long they are going to take to get to the front line. Another weakness, Nilla mentioned it earlier, lack of CQC infantry. I mean, you can spam rifles all you want, but you're going to struggle when you're entering those heavy forests. You know, big heavy forested maps, you are going to struggle on them. Opportunities, I think you can get a lot of rifles out quickly, and that's what Nilla does. He gets a lot of rifles out quickly. You've then got to support it with other units. If you use this deck well, you use the combination of units together, it can take on top decks, and it can last. You can push, you can defend. It's a little bit flexible. You know, if you're up against a Vanguard player, you can bring in a hell of a lot of rifles, bring in those 6-pounders. Defensive stance. You're up against a balanced player, you can push rifles forwards, 20 points apiece, 6 rifles per tick in A phase. You can push fairly hard early, but you have to get good combination of units together. At some point, you're going to need to combine things together, and it's about getting that point at the right time. Threats, again, I think Nilla's spot on. He talks about infantry spam as a big threat. I also think, you know, if you're coming up against a lot of infantry with Molotov cocktails, they're going to be throwing them, your rifle's going to be running all over the place, not knowing what's hit them. They can go down. Also, if someone manages to pick apart your tanks, rifles on their own, they have no AT weaponry, they need some supporting fire from something, and the tanks are there to provide that supporting fire. Yeah, you've still got your AT guns, but what's there to do the HE damage? You know, you're relying on then, I think, your artillery, and things start to unravel. That's it. We're done. The 15th Scots. Thanks very much for watching this, guys. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that like button. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed. Make sure you check out my channel. Lots of Steel Division 2 content always coming on my channel. And also check out the links in the description to my Twitch and Twitter feeds. You know, jump on and Twitch and play Steel Division 2 with me. That's it for me though. Thanks very much for watching. I am Angry Bird. I will see you next time. Come on. Yes! Oh, he's got an IR-2. Oh, crap. I need the plane ASAP. Oh, my days. Oh, my God. Oh. Oh, my God. What? What? Destroyed it. What? What got the kill? Oh, my God. What the hell got the kill?